protect us, and I very much appreciate what the honourable gentleman has said. We just press on with the debate. That's what we're here to do. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, the Father of the House, the Member for Rushcliffe, and also to follow the Honourable Member for Hove, who's become a good friend during the course of this debacle, and also the Honourable Member for Grantham and Stamford. Given the mess that the present government have got the United Kingdom into, I think each of us who've spoken already today are, in our own way, trying to ensure that the Prime Minister doesn't go naked into the conference chamber, if I may use that phrase, when she goes to the EU Council on the 10th, on the 10th of April, in a week on Wednesday. And as the Father of the House said in his speech, we mustn't allow no deal to happen by accident on the 12th of April, simply because this House has failed to find a deal which a majority can get behind. And as the government's chief whip himself has admitted, the Prime Minister's failure from the beginning, when she lost that general election 2 years ago, to try and build a consensus across this House and with the devolved governments, means that we are highly unlikely to find a deal which this House can get behind before Friday the 12th. And therefore, we need some sort of backstop, some sort of insurance policy against a no deal. And we also need a way to make sure that the Prime Minister honours the promise she gave this House at the beginning of last week, that unless this House agrees to it, no deal will not happen. That's what the Prime Minister said. And as we know, and as has been said already this afternoon, one of the things that definitely did happen in the indicative votes last week was that 400 honourable members rejected the idea of a no-deal Brexit. And we know that there's a majority against a no-deal Brexit, and I give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I commend her for her efforts with this motion before us again today. She will remember, as I do, that the Prime Minister pledged that if Parliament did vote to support no deal, that would become the government's policy. So does she not agree with me that if Parliament votes for her motion tonight, that should be the government's policy? It should be a backstop to make sure that no deal cannot happen.
Yes, I do, and that's the purpose of this motion. And it's not an SNP motion, although I'm absolutely delighted that all my honourable friends are backing it. It's a cross-party motion, and it's been supported by members of every single party in this House, apart from the DUP. And the purpose of the motion is that if we cannot agree a deal by the 10th of April, and everyone must see as a matter of common sense that that's highly unlikely, if we can't agree a deal by the 10th of April, the date of the EU Council, then this motion, if it's passed tonight, would mandate the government to ask, first of all, for an extension of the Article 50 period, and if the EU didn't agree to that, the UK Government would require to table a motion immediately asking this House to approve no deal. And my motion goes on to say that assuming the House didn't approve no deal, and I think we can assume that given the many votes that have been in it already, the United Kingdom Government would then be mandated to revoke Article 50 before we exit the EU with no deal late on the night of the 12th April. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. I'm very sympathetic to the idea that we need a backstop in extremis to prevent no deal from happening. But I wondered if she could explain to us why, beyond that, she went on to introduce that level of complexity that there is later in the motion and such a prescriptive route towards doing that. Is she really wedded to that process, or is she more flexible as to how that might work in the future?
Well, I'm keen to get this motion passed today, and I was very disappointed that some honourable members, particularly in the official opposition, didn't feel able to support it last week. But in the spirit of cross-party working, I am trying to be respectful of the reasons why they didn't feel able to support it, and understand why it's easy for me, coming from the City of Edinburgh, which voted 75% to remain, and the country of Scotland, which voted 62% to remain, and representing a constituency which voted 72% to remain, it's easy for me to cross this bridge, but it's more difficult for members in English and Welsh constituencies with different mandates. And equally, unlike the British government, who have failed to recognise the fact that Scotland voted Remain and Northern Ireland voted Remain, I am trying to recognise that other parts of these islands voted Leave, and that for some people to support this motion, the door cannot be closed on the Brexit process by a revocation to prevent no deal. And that's why, with the assistance of lawyers, including Joe Mon QC, who was my fellow petitioner when we took the case to the Court of Justice in Luxembourg to establish that Article 50 can be unilaterally revoked. That's why, with him, we've crafted the motion in this way. And in that connection, I declare my interest in relation to the support of the Good Law Project. I'll give way to my fellow sponsor.
Would the honourable and learned lady agree with me that nobody except those who positively want a crash-out, no-deal Brexit, nobody else in this House should have any problems in voting for her motion?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do agree, and I really do appeal to members across the House, and I know that 10 Conservative members, honourable members, voted for this last week, including 2 junior ministers, and I appeal to anyone who cares about the people who live in these islands and the economy of these islands to prevent a no-deal from happening. Absolutely. Now, it's no secret that I came to this House to secure an independent Scotland, and that is still my primary aim. But it is not in the interest of Scotland for the Scottish economy to go down the tube with a no-deal Brexit. It's not in the interest of the English, Welsh and Northern Irish economies to go that way. And it's not in Scotland's interests for the English and Welsh and Northern Irish economies to go that way. And make no mistake about it, Mr Speaker, if we crash out with no deal, it will be the jobs of ordinary, decent working people that go first. They're the sort of people who vote for the SNP, they're the sort of people who vote for the Labour Party, and we must protect them. I do give way.
I thank her very much for giving way, and would she also agree that what she is doing today is supported by the 6 million people who signed the Revoke petition, a matter which is being debated in Westminster Hall at this very moment?
It is, but the difference is, it is indeed, but the difference is that many of the people who signed that petition would like to see us just revoke Article 50 now, straight away, and that would be an end of the matter. I'd quite like to see that myself, but that's not what this motion seeks to do. This motion is about an insurance policy, using revocation as an insurance policy to support a no deal. And in order to, in respectful recognition of the fact that the issue of Brexit won't go away if we simply revoke to avoid no deal, the motion seeks to mandate the government to set up a public inquiry under the Inquiries Act within 3 months of revocation to establish whether a model of a future relationship with the EU could be found which would command a majority support in the United Kingdom. And it also says if that could be done, then another referendum would be held on the question of whether to re-trigger Article 50 and renegotiate that model. Now, I'll give way in a moment, but I just want to knock on the head at this stage a myth that has been peddled by some people that somehow, if this motion were passed, the EU would object to us revoking Article 50. That is not the case, and I think it's a misunderstanding of the judgment of the Court of Justice in Luxembourg in the Scottish case, which did not say that once you revoke Article 50, you can never issue an Article 50 notice ever again. It categorically did not say that. If you can't take that from me, then please read the judgment of the court, which I've put in my Twitter feed this afternoon. I'm going to give way to the honourable gentleman opposite.
Grateful to the honourable learned lady. Would she agree with me that one of the failures of this debate in this House and beyond it is to talk about exactly what no deal is all about, what it actually means for our constituents? We talk about it in too much of a conceptual way, and we let those who actually are in favour of leaving with no deal get away without coming to the real details, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the 83 trade deals which we would be no longer part of.
I absolutely agree. That has been one of the many failures of this process, that this House has not been afforded sufficient time to knock on the head the sort of misinformation peddled about the consequences of no deal. But fortunately, we have much independent research on the consequences of no deal. And you will find, Mr Speaker, that that independent research wholly tells us that no deal would be bad for the economies of these islands, for jobs and for the living standards of people who live here. It would be to shoot ourselves in the foot and to cut off our nose to spite our face. And I give way to the Honourable Lady.
That's not right, Honourable Lady, for giving way. And I'm proud to have signed her motion, and I shall be voting for it tonight. My only concern is not about the motion, but if it's passed, the consequences, because I think, like many of us right across this House, we are so concerned that whatever votes we come to, ever finds a majority, the government will simply ignore them.
Well, we have every reason to be concerned about that, because as the Honourable Lady knows, the government have repeatedly ignored votes in this House. However, Mr Speaker, if an instruction is clear and unequivocal, as this motion is, and it is ignored by the government, there will be political consequences, and we've seen that previously with a contempt motion in this House, and there could also be legal consequences. Now, in any normal times, this government would be long gone because of its incompetence and the multiple fiascos we've had recently. But really, if this government were to ignore an instruction as clear as this and plunge the nations of these islands into the economic disaster of no deal, not only would this government not survive it, but the Conservative and Unionist Party would not survive it. So I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Because I'm looking closely at the motion she's got before the House. Can she confirm, with the timelines that have been outlined in here, that this will indeed absolutely mean voting for this tonight will mean voting again for European elections and having to have MEPs? Absolutely.
We all know that if there's any sort of a lengthy extension, there will have to be European elections. Now, I know there is some learned opinion to the contrary, but I think the weight of opinion is that there will have to be European elections. But if that, I know that's going to be difficult for some people to deal with, but if that is the consequence of preventing no deal and protecting our constituents' livelihoods, the businesses in our constituents and the jobs of our constituents, then so be it. And no responsible MP could really fail to support this motion tonight, even if there are 4 motions before us, and I'm going to vote for two of the other ones. But supporting this motion does not preclude honourable members from supporting other motions. It's not a motion about the eventual outcome. It's a motion about process and a motion about protecting us. Now, I can see the speakers are keen to bring in other speakers, and I'm not going to take up much more time, so I will wind up to a conclusion. But for Conservative members of Parliament, this is an opportunity to make good on the promise that the Prime Minister has already made to this House, that unless the House agrees to it, no deal will not happen. For Labour MPs, it's the opportunity to make good on the promise in their 2017 manifesto, which of course I read, as I always do with Labour manifestos, and which says that Labour recognises that leaving the EU with no deal is the worst possible deal for Britain and that it would do damage to our economy and trade. Labour will reject no deal as a viable option. This is pretty much the last chance saloon, Mr Speaker. And if Labour want to reject no deal as a viable option and put in place the insurance policy of revocation, then they really need to do that today. But most of all, this motion should appeal to all of us as Democrats, because this decision of such importance for the United Kingdom between revocation and no deal ought to be one for the representatives of the people in this Parliament and not for the Prime Minister of a minority government. That's why I've called it the parliamentary supremacy motion. And of course, in Scotland, it's the people that are sovereign and supreme, not the Parliament. But I recognise that for all intents and purposes, this Parliament is supreme. And this motion is all about taking back control and making sure that we have an insurance policy against the dangers that this rather confused government could crash us into a no deal without really meaning to do so.